No Ordinary Disruption is a collective work. It's the McKinsey Global Institute's view of the world. So I'm going to start this off with some caveats. So we start with the big warning sign. It's that, as Yogi Berra said, predictions are always difficult, especially about the future. So here's a famous prediction. I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers. I think most of us know which titan of technology predicted that. This fellow over here, Tom Watson. So even the folks who are most in the know, so to speak, can get it wrong. Here's another famous prediction. The cell phone penetration in the US by 2000 will be 900,000 subscribers. Anybody want to guess who made that prediction?
Gordon Orr.
Yeah, I think he would probably take you up on that, yes. So that was us. So yeah, I think we'll take this all in the spirit of exploration and challenge. The facts are, though, that we've had a relatively good run of it all. The folks who are here in this room have benefited from what we'll call the Great Moderation. We've had a lot of growth. The growth has been equal parts population growth and productivity growth, which is quite unusual in the history of mankind, in fact, to have those two things happening at the same time, at the same pace. We haven't had as much volatility as you might expect, particularly if you look at this decade compared to the 3 or 4 decades that came before it. It's been the 3 or 4 decades that came before were quite stable. We had an assumption around resource stability. Working in the resource industry, it was pretty, what's your forward curve look like? And we said, well, just draw a line and it goes like that. And every year, technology will help us make resources that much more cheaper and available. Cheaper capital. People didn't realize this, but we had this huge investment in capital after World War II, drove up capital costs, and then since re-urbanization of Europe, wasn't that much of a call on capital, and costs of capital were relatively low and benign for 2 or 3 decades. There was a lot of people coming into the marketplace and finally governments themselves were starting to privatize and reform a lot. So we had, what was arguably a very sort of favorable environment. We think that's changing. We think that underlying that favorable environment, there were some mega trends. There were some trends that were going on for decades, and these trends are now reaching a point where they're piling on top of each other to change the ways in which we consume, the ways in which we work, and ultimately the ways in which we spend and our governments as well. And I'll talk very briefly about each one of those forces. The first is industrialization and urbanization. That's, of course, where we live. This is where we are. We've seen this. And 45 of the top global 200 cities will be Chinese by 2025. That's not a particularly staggering number to anybody who lives in China, but it sort of starts to bring it home that essentially we are living in an urban century, but we're actually living in a Chinese urban century. This one is the chart that's kind of the coolest chart that we have on the graphic side. It says, the center of the world's economic weight, you draw, average it all out, was somewhere in Nepal. And then nothing much changed for about 1,500 years. And then all of a sudden it started taking a lurch to the left and headed off towards Europe and eventually almost made it to Greenland. And then somehow, later on in the 1950s, things have started to make the big, long return trip. And so we expect by the year 2050, the center of the world will be back in Kazakhstan. It does represent essentially how economic dynamism translates into a sense of place, into a sense of opportunity. And I think you really feel that here in Asia now, so that this wave of industrialization and urbanization has made people rightfully realize that this is, in fact, the center of the world. That's, of course, an incredibly hopeful thing as well. The second big wave of this is technologies. And of course, you here have the alphabet soup of every technology out there. What to make of all of this? Well, we take away 2 big things. First of all, everything is speeding up. It took us my favorite on this one is the 3D printing one. It took 500 years to go from the printing press to the computer printer. It's taken us 30 years to get from the computer printer to a 3D printer. Robotics, the same. So we have just an acceleration of the ability to bring things to marketplace. And you don't have to be a believer in the singularity to acknowledge the fact, that the technological progress and the capacity for technological progress itself is accelerating. Even more interesting, of course, is the ability to scale quickly. It took 40 years for radio to get to 50 million users. It took 13 years for television. It took 3 years for the internet. Probably takes Xiaomi about 3 months. This is the ability to get to scale overnight is again a feature of our modern world, of these new trends. And we think this is also starting to create a tipping point in terms of how quickly you can see established industry structures being changed. This one is one that people don't get as much press about, but I think for everybody in the room it will resonate. Over 1 in 4 people in advanced economies and plus China will be over 65 in a few years. So this whole idea of retirement, what is that again? I think that the notion of how the workplace can both accommodate a new set of employees and maintain the value of the skills that have been built over decades, plus address a new set of consumers. These issues are just starting to be wrestled with, plus, of course, the legacy issues around pensions and benefit schemes, which have all been predicated on an entirely different workforce. So we are now going into the age where, if anybody who lives in Shanghai knows the Chinese demographic profile in 2030 looks something like the Chinese pavilion at World Expo, which sort of something like that. So we're having an 8, well, it's now 4-2-1, but it'll probably get closer to 6-3-1 by the year 2050 moment in terms of retirees to actual working people. The final one is global flows. We heard a lot about how the global recession had a negative impact on trade and so forth. Well, actually not so much. In 1990, you had $2 trillion worth of interregional trade. 23 years later, it's $11 trillion. So clearly, trade is a secular trend. It is a long-term trend. It's driven as much by technology and the lowering of cost of transport as it is by the capacity to engage in global trade. What you also see here is the change in the flows themselves, where previously pretty much this was a European, North American kind of game, and now we have a much more diverse and a global trade pattern. And we are looking at trade, this is the goods and services one, but actually, of course, it's as important to look at the trade in information, the trade in people, and the sort of the flows of people, and we see dramatic increases in all of those as well. So those are some of the very longer-term trends. With that, we're getting volatility. So this is the number of 3 sigma price changes. So all of the notion that you had a stable system before, that things were more or less predictable, and that you could not, in a sense, we now have to sort of expect the black swan event, is what we would argue. And that building that type of resilience into one's personal life as well as in professional institutional capacity is simply a part of being present in the current world economy. So we need an intuition reset, is what we argue about this. This book is not saying that we have the vision of the future, quite the reverse. It's saying that one cannot have a vision of the future, that one should essentially question your assumptions. We will have a world that is more volatile. The people who run the world economy, the way in which the world economy is run, will evolve, and will evolve quite quickly. So the critical aspect here is not to have a prediction, but to be able to respond, and to be resilient, and to be quick on your feet. So the athletes that are the ones that don't get hurt, those are the ones that are more agile. The ones that tend to bulk up and stay in place and get hit a lot, they're the ones who tend to exit the arena quite quickly. So this notion of resilience and being flexible and responsive and able to change one's intuitions, that's actually what we look for now as being the hallmark of success. So a few examples of what that means. First of all, the marketplace. The marketplace has dramatically changed, and here we see the consuming class and the share of the population in the consuming class over the years, and as you can see, a dramatic increase in the number of folks who are joining that class. What does it mean to be part of the consuming class? Well, my colleague one time would talk about the Pearl River Delta Piano Company. There are over 100 million people studying piano in China today, and I can guarantee you they're not playing Yamaha pianos. They're playing, some local version of a, play piano, and the people who are making those pianos, they're the ones who are ultimately going to be the global piano makers of the next decade. So how does one meet the new consuming class who want to consume, who want to have all those things? They just don't have as much money as people in the old consuming class did. Creates a real challenge for the folks serving them. And here's another one, then. It's labor markets. We do see an increasing disconnect between what technology can do for us and where the jobs that technology creates for us. And as a result, we see a surplus of low-skilled labor, and we're seeing a real automation, and this now affects not only us as individuals in the, sort of the lower end of things, but it also creates automation of knowledge work. At the same time, we still see shortages of medium and high-skilled workers. So this is going to upend the traditional sort of notion that labor markets clear. And as I mentioned, this is not just about low-skilled work, it's also about disrupting knowledge work as well. And we've taken a look through the entire economy. And at this point, we're on balance. I would say we're guardedly optimistic about China. We think that the net effect of the employment of internet on Chinese employment will be a balance. But in North America, we'd be not so much. In North America, we would see a secular trend towards rising unemployment. And finally, competition. This is the Fortune 500, and whenever I show this chart to an audience that has a lot of Chinese people in it, they get very excited because they say, yeah, there's a company now for me. Because over 25% of the global Fortune 500 will be from emerging markets, and this will be, many of those will be in Chinese, but also not exclusively in Asian. So the competition that we face will no longer be the traditional global multinationals. It will be essentially all of us. And I think that's actually a really good thing, but it also creates a lot of unexpected opportunities. So I'll close with a couple of things. How many people know what this is? Yeah? Yes, it is a gene sequencing machine. Why is this cool? It's cool because it took approximately a couple of $1 billion and an effort in the scale of the Panama Canal to sequencing the first human genome. This machine can be sold for $150,000, and you can use it to sequence a gene at home for $1,000. That took place over 10 years. That's why this is cool. And this came out about 2 or 3 years ago. So that's one thing that is intuition. Anybody know this guy? This is an even cooler story. Okay, I see not so many volunteers. I thought this guy is 19 years old. What he's holding in his hand is a 3D printed robot prosthetic arm, which he made for $500, which will replace a prosthesis that otherwise costs $80,000 and has to be replaced twice over in the lifetime of a young child. He built this at home, and he picked it up on he picked up his robotics knowledge on the internet. He's currently working for NASA in the Robonaut program. He's 19. So, this is the future. This is why this is exciting. This guy creates new lives. He has an aspiration to create prosthetics for all. So this is and it's possible. So that's why this is not only a threat, but it's also a really interesting opportunity. So the greatest optimist of all of us, the pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity. The optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. So Winston is a great one for a quote. And I always feel like he's, for us in business and in Asia, we should take these things to heart. This should be who we are. We should really embrace this philosophy. And what does it take to do that in your organization? We say 4 things. First of all, reset your own intuition. It's very unlikely that the rules of success that you've had for the last 10 or 20 years will actually stand you in as good a stead going forward. If your context changes, so should you. And so that's the first thing. Secondly, it's not just about you. It's mostly about the people around you. It's hard to overestimate the impact of one's immediate social environment. So embed curiosity in your organization. Find the grit in the oyster and please keep it. Don't immediately expel it and stop hiring in your own image. Prioritizing agility over caution. This was the point about being resilient, being quick, explore, and then respond. And that's what will create the sustainable organization. So not the one that stays in place and builds barriers, and like King Canute tries to hold back the waves. That way has never proven to be successful. And finally, find the opportunity, not the hazard. Be willing to take the risks in light of the opportunities. This is the lesson learned from whether it's in the public or the private sector about let's be innovative and let's try things. It will only work out to the better because we are a resilient species. What does not kill us makes us stronger. And only through the process of exploration can we achieve that.